So again, for folks who are joining, we are, there's Roberto. Okay, so we're going to get started here as soon as we can make sure that we can get him set up with a microphone, and I will get right into it. So thanks everybody for joining us today. This is a different time, but the same great CASA Twitter space you've come to know and love. Today, we are joined by Roberto Sussman. He's the senior researcher and lecturer at the National University of Mexico, also the founder of ProVapo, which is a pro-tobacco harm reduction advocacy group in Mexico. And I went to all the trouble of opening up a brief description of ProVapo on the INCO website. And of course, I moved that window around. ProVapo Mexico is the first nonprofit of all consumers NGO in Mexico that stands for the rights of Mexican consumers on non-combustible nicotine products. And when we can get Roberto set up here with a microphone, all you have to do, Roberto, if you're able to hear me, you should have an invitation to become a speaker from Danielle or from the CASA main account, and that'll allow you just say yes. And I think we were working out some settings issues coming into this. As long as everything has access to all the stuff it needs, you should become a speaker pretty quickly. But while we're waiting for some technical stuff to get worked out, how you doing, Matt?
Sorry, I'm good. How are you? I was posting on Facebook about our space, so sorry, my brain's a little distracted.
No worries. I just sort of threw you a curveball there.
How's things on the East Coast, my friend?
It's good. It feels like summertime finally. It's humid and warm. The grass is growing. All the wonderful things.
Yeah, we've had a really cold spring so far.
Yeah, spring shows up here late, but when it gets here, it's glorious. We spend about 6 months of the year in winter, so.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, same here.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so all these technical problems are solved. Thanks God.
Fantastic. I think this might be record time. We've got all this sorted out in the first 5 minutes, so excellent work. So I'll get right to it. Roberto Sussman, welcome to our Twitter space. Thanks for joining us today. And of course, we'll get into the nitty gritty of what's happening in Mexico. But before we get started, it's always a good idea to kind of introduce our guests to folks who are listening. So if you don't mind giving us a little bit of background, how do you got involved in tobacco harm reduction and, of course, founding ProVapo Mexico?
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to inform the North American public of what is happening south of the border, right? The way I got involved into tobacco harm reduction is because I comply with two characteristics. First, I'm a user. I mean, I have been, I was a smoker for about 40 years. And occasionally I continue smoking like one cigar or one pipe every week or every 2 weeks. But 6 years ago, I switched to vaping. And another characteristic is that I am a scientist, right? So it's this intersection between being a scientist, I have a PhD in physics, and I have very good knowledge of aerosol physics, right? So this intersection is how I got here, because I noticed that a lot of the tobacco science and e-cigarette science, it's really of very low quality. And I was incensed because I'm a scientist. I don't like people to mop the floor with science, right? And I've had lots of debates with people like creationists and so on. So I told myself, this is pseudoscience. And that generates a very powerful emotional drive. And then as a user, I'm also influenced because at least in the US, vaping is legal. Maybe has not been regulated by the FDA, but at least you can you can go into a vape shop and you can get a receipt. And the police are not raiding vape shops. But here in Mexico, we live with fear. You vape and it's illegal, and then the authorities are very intransigent, and this has been the situation all the time. So these two characteristics put me in the orbit of tobacco harm reduction. And then I met other similar people, not with a scientific background, but users with a legal, with a they are lawyers and economists, different professions, and this is how we founded Proapeo. Yeah, it's Proapeo Mexico, right? So, and I'm very happy to be able to address CASA. It's an organization that we admire very much, and we mirror ourselves as a sort of Mexican version of CASA, a small version though. Thanks. Yeah.
Excellent. Happy to be a part of the gang here, and hopefully we are leading somewhat of a decent example for everybody around the world. Certainly, if success is a measure of effectiveness, then I think we're all a bit behind the eight ball. But so you've gotten into the sort of legal status of vaping in Mexico, and just for, I guess, a little bit of background, has it always been sort of hunted down by the authorities, or was there ever a time when it was not really that big of a deal? Did you guys get to fly under the radar like we did here in the United States for a while, or has the government always kind of been out to get you?
No, no. Well, vaping has always been illegal in Mexico, but not usage. I mean, you even now, technically, it's not illegal to use it, to use the devices, right, to vape. But it has the prohibition. The basic prohibition was to commercialize it, right? Now, the legal basis of this prohibition that was, I think, it was implemented in 2011. Vaping started arriving in Mexico very early, like 2007, 8, but it was marginal. E-cigarettes became started to be more visible around 2010, 2011. And then, our health authorities follow the WHO like a priest in a rural town would follow the Pope. It's the Vatican for them. So, without much thinking and using absolute crude junk science, they decided to ban commercialization. And the legal basis is extremely weak. In our tobacco law that was drafted in 2008, 2009, I think it was drafted, no, 2008. It was drafted, and there was no mention of electronic delivery systems because they were unaware of it. And so they took a article of that law that refers to objects that are not tobacco products but look like tobacco products. And what they had in mind were chocolate cigarettes. Chocolate cigarettes were very popular. They were like, imagine a cigarette box, but instead of cigarettes, you had chocolate cylinders. And in order, they wanted to ban that, and that was the article number 16, I think, of the tobacco law that banned this tobacco, this chocolate cigarettes. And they used that law for vaping because they say, well, vaping is not a tobacco product, but looks like one. And that's a very weak legal basis. And then, but I have also to say that the authorities in Mexico, and I'm talking about the equivalent of the FDI, but in a much smaller scale than the FDA, does not have the personnel, does not have the resources to go after vape shops. So it's they in fact vaping was booming, and and e-cigarettes were being sold. And occasionally they did some interventions and seizures of material and so on. So vendors started to use what is called the habeas corpus law. We have a habeas corpus law. It's la ley de amparo, to get habeas corpus to prevent authorities from merchandise seizures, right? And one of these habeas corpus got the attention of one of the chambers of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled that the prohibition is unconstitutional because how can you ban a product that substitutes cigarettes if cigarettes are legal? So that was a very important ruling. And the situation, to summarize, the situation between 2011 and 2018-19 was a situation of tolerance. It was illegal, and occasionally the authorities did some seizures and so on, but mostly it was tolerated. And the ruling of the Supreme Court motivated sectors of the political class to launch initiatives to regulate the products, right? And so that was a situation was relatively liberal in the sense that it was illegal, but it was tolerated. And the vendors belong to the informal sector. Like in Mexico, like 50% of the workforce is employed in an informal sector that is technically illegal, but it's not criminal. It's just people that are outside of the revenue system, and it's very common, right? Now, the situation began to change when Andrés Manuel López Obrador was elected as president, and this I think it requires more explanation. I wonder if you would like to ask questions at this point.
Well, I think you sort of brought us up to present day. I did want to say I might be off the mark here, but the sort of approach to tolerating e-cigarettes in Mexico, it sounds a little bit like how the United States has dealt with cannabis, where at the federal level, of course, it's illegal, but states are allowed to make their own decisions, and whereas the federal authorities have the authority to go in and bust up people selling or growing cannabis. They've just sort of been tolerating it. And so that's how we've been able to make some movements on reforming cannabis policy. I don't know how similar that actually is to what's going on in Mexico, but there's sort of that irony there, of course, that we're talking about nicotine versus THC and all the discussion around that, but not so much a question as an observation. But you did, I think, bring us up to present day. The reason for bringing you on was an announcement 2 weeks ago from your president that the sales and marketing of electronic cigarettes is prohibited in Mexico. And so I'm sort of curious, how has that actually changed anything in Mexico?
Yes. No. I just wanted to make a pause in order to be certain that people understood the situation. And it has similarities with what you described with cannabis. Cannabis in Mexico is now in the process of being legalized, and it's also similar. It is no, but there is nicotine was tolerated to a higher level than cannabis in this period between 2011 and 18. And let me tell you that the situation I'm describing is similar to Argentina and Brazil. Other Latin American countries have advanced more, like Colombia and Costa Rica. And what happens is that law enforcement in our region in Latin America is not like in the United States, right? Like if in Finland, they say vaping is prohibited to sale, the commercialization, then it's absolutely prohibited. Nobody would sell it, very few people. And then criminal elements might take over. But in Mexico, there is a continuum between the criminal cartels, the informal market, and the legal sector, right? And so the informal, before 2018, or even the present, before, let's say, 2021, I think the criminal market was not interested in the vaping product because the margin wins were very small. Anyway, let's move over to what is happening now. Uh, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, I will call him AMLO because that's the acronym that he uses. His okay. AMLO himself was is an ex smoker. He used to smoke. He is completely uninterested in the issue of nicotine or tobacco or e-cigarettes. At the beginning, he never cared about that. It's a non-issue for him. It's completely irrelevant for him. But he is a very centralizing president. He wants to centralize power in himself. So his regime has been destroying or trying to destroy by lack of funds any independent institution that he can see, any institution that is autonomous from his power. He tries to defund it or to anyway. He's very centralizing person, and now he appointed as as a de facto health minister. He is not the official health minister, but he is acting like the health minister. It's an epidemiologist graduated from the Bloomberg John Hopkins public school public health school. His name is Hugo Lopez Gatel Ramirez. Hugo Lopez Gatel. I'm going to call him Lopez Gatel for brief. Now, Lopez Gatel has absolute power over the health sector. Just like Lopez Obrador has absolute power over Mexican politics and Mexican life, he awarded Lopez Gatel the same type of power, but over the health sector. The health sector involves institutes, hospitals, several dependencies like our equivalent of NIDA, and several other, and also he gave the our FDA, which is called COFEPRIS, was independent, was autonomous, but Lopez Obrador put it under the wings of Lopez Gatel, right? So this guy, Lopez Gatel, is connected with technocrats from the Pan American Health Organization, the World Health Organization, with a ¿cómo se llama? Convenio Marco. It's the Framework Convention of Tobacco Control, and also with Bloomberg philanthropies. Like, for example, many of the ideas of Michael Bloomberg about food are now implemented in Mexico. And of course, the ideas that Michael Bloomberg has about nicotine and about vaping and tobacco harm reduction, Lopez Gatel tried to implement them. But the difference between other health ministers is that none of them had the power that Lopez Gatel has. And Lopez Gatel is an extremely vertical guy, extremely authoritarian, and so he has been trying to put these policies in a much higher intensity than before. Like, this means that the tolerance is being disrupted. Now, a first here is that the pandemic struck in 2020, and so Lopez Gatel crusade against vaping, which had already begun with EVALI. During EVALI times, there were several epidemiological alerts in Mexico, and they were blaming all vaping on that. But for Lopez Gatel, EVALI never finished, right? EVALI has been his technical argument, okay? Now, the pandemic came in, and Lopez Gatel had to deal with a real crisis, not with an imaginary crisis. And so Lopez Gatel was appointed to be the COVID czar, like the person in charge of the official response of the Mexican government, the Mexican state, to the pandemic. But the performance of Lopez Gatell as the leader of this response was terrible, absolutely terrible. And to add insult to injury or injury to insult, he was also very frivolous. Like he dismissed people who criticized him as conspirators. And so, to make it short, he became a very unpopular and a very discredited and despised public health official. But he's untouchable because he has the protection of López Obrador. Now that the pandemic is over, he is renewing the offensive against vapes. And here I would like to pause to see if people have any questions.
Yeah, well, I'd like to, if Matt, if you've got anything to say, I know that you had to drop off early, so if you had any questions that popped up.
Yeah, I think it was touched on a little bit already, but my big interest with this is, now that it seems like it is more, black and white, it's illegal, and they might start enforcing it more with the powers they have. Is vaping big enough in Mexico to where you might see the criminal elements, the cartels, start trying to take over that sector?
Yeah. I'll go to that now. But before I have to mention that one of the efforts of Lopez Gatell was to interfere in the legislative process because during 2020 and 21, there were several law initiatives that tried to regulate vaping, even two of them that tried to regulate vaping as a tobacco harm reduction, not as cigarettes. And Lopez Gatell didn't like that. And then Lopez Gatell was able to convince Lopez Obrador to issue the first prohibition decree in 2020. And he used the argument of Evali. He told Lopez Obrador, who is completely ignorant on this issue, he said, do you want Mexican kids to die? Well, look at what is happening in the US, as if Evali never ended. And so Lopez Gatell, I think he was fooled by him, and he issued the first decree that we believe that he signed without seeing. Now, Lopez Gatell is a very proud and very egocentric person. He will, in order to have any regulation, it's necessary that his decree is revoked, and he will never do that. So, what is the reaction of Lopez Gatell? To entrench himself in intransigent. And the more you criticize him, the more intransigent he becomes. Now, this means that Lopez got now, before I was mentioning to you the health minister, but now, together with the health minister, you have a very powerful president that is acting like an activist of campaign for tobacco-free kids. Now Lopez Gatell has taken vaping as a personal issue. And then the Supreme Court issued another ruling supporting the previous ruling because they tried to overrule that. And so the Supreme Court is saying something that López Obrador doesn't like, and he got very upset, very angry. And so now he's taking, vaping is an issue for him, right? So this means that there is a threat that they're going to be more efficient in enforcing. We are already seeing seizures in stores and so on, but we don't know if this will be just something temporary that then will wear down, or if it is going to be a more permanent policy. But there is a lot of preoccupation among vendors and among consumers that something might change. It's unlikely because there are so many problems in Mexico, and the authorities that will be enforcing this do not have enough resources and personnel. Now let's go to the direct questions you ask. How many vapers are in Mexico? According to the official data from 2017, there were already 1 million people who answered the question of have you vaped in the last 30 days? And this is what they define as actual users. and there were 1 million people, most of them, like 95% adults. And some teenagers also, like about 100,000 teenagers, said that they were also actual users. But that is 5 years ago. We believe that the number now is close to 1.5 million people, right? Now, this market is supplied by informal vendors, and this market has different levels. There is the level of middle class and above, which is informed consumers, and the vendors self-regulate, and they have established stores. But then there are lots of street vendors that sell all sorts of material, like very old second generation devices, right? But then in 2021, there was a massive flow of it's like a flood of very, very cheap and low quality Chinese made disposables, especially the brand Masking, but other brands like that. And now these disposables have flooded the market, at least in Mexico City. I don't know so much in the states, but we think, and of course, I'm speculating because I don't have the data. I'm not a private researcher or whatever, so I don't have the data. But talking with people and what I see with my own eyes is that the established vendors are small merchants, or maybe some of them medium sized merchants. They do not have the resources to generate such a large network of distribution, right? So we suspect that criminal elements, some cartels, are within, but we also suspect that they have the tolerance or the association with elements within the government, right? So this is new, and maybe this is connected in a sense with the much harsher attitude of the authorities towards vaping. You know, the Baptist and bootlegger alliance, that we might be seeing something like that. And this is very worrying because this is a market that has a lot of potential to growth. Bear in mind that there are much more nicotine consumers if you include the 15 million smokers. It's a much larger market than cannabis or any other illegal drugs, right? Because in the US, it might be different. But in Mexico, cannabis is not so widespread as in the US, right? So to answer your question, yes, there is an imminent danger that criminal cartels or cartels, organized crime, we call them, will get into the market. We don't know how this can evolve. So far, there is no violence, as far as we know, but there can be extortion, like cartels. Sometimes, if they see that you have a very prosperous, established commerce, they do not close it for you. They come and they tell you, well, we want 50% of your earnings, or we want X percentage of your earnings. It's extortion. That's the way they work. So we don't know if this is already happening because people that suffer these things are not willing to talk about, right? But there is a suspicion that this might be happening.
Yeah, thanks for laying all of that out, especially issues with sort of organized crime getting into the business of selling nicotine products. Usually when I think about this, I don't fully consider all of the kind of secondary things of like you mentioned, extortion and the mechanism through which organized crime gets into retailers and forces them to do things and takes money from them. What I immediately jump to, and maybe you know about this, of course, with the legal status in Mexico of these products for so many years, and the tolerance that you described, everything is pretty much conducted on an informal market. Have there been issues of tainted supply or poison supply, um, where people have been sick, and completely removed from EVALI or cannabis or other drugs, but just nicotine vaping? Have you seen issues with the quality of products?
Yeah, look, let me give you an analogy. Have you all eaten tacos, right? You've eaten tacos. You know what's a taco? It's a Mexican staple food, right?
Yes,
Absolutely.
I like tacos way too much. That's why I'm chubby.
Okay, so let's say there are three types of tacos: good quality tacos, bad quality tacos but not rotten, and rotten tacos, tacos that have salmonella or something like that, that will make you sick or even kill you, right? So with nicotine, we only have good tacos and bad tacos. Like some of the devices, some of the disposables that you buy are not, they are not tainted by poison. People are not dying from it, but it tastes awful, and you can get a very nasty throat irritation from using them. Now, people who get this irritation simply drop them. They're disposables, and there are many users that might use them for a while and then drop them away because there is no information. Since there is no regulation, and we, the advocates, we are denied media platforms by the government. And the media in Mexico, I have to say that I'm very angry because the media in Mexico only talks to us when something bad happens. It's very difficult to get access to media in Mexico that has diffusion, right? So people are not informed. I'm so angry about that. And when I'm saying that, I'm saying not only people who are poor or who are marginal, that you say, well, okay, they're not informed because they're marginal, they're very poor, they have to work their asses to get something to the table and so on. But even middle class intellectuals in Mexico, they are not informed, and often they read the New York Times, and the New York Times is one of the major bullshitters in the Washington Post. All these liberal newspapers and media in the U.S., they're very much anti-vaping, right? And so liberal Mexicans and well educated, they tend to follow liberal Americans, right? And liberal Americans, they hate vaping because they associate vaping with big tobacco, and they grew up hating big tobacco, and they quit smoking 30 years ago. And so it's very difficult. There is no information in Mexico, right? So many people are exposed to these disposables, and they vape them. They're not dying. There's nobody has died from it, or nobody has got so sick to go to a hospital. But it is like low quality tacos. It is like if the taco was prepared with low quality meat, but not rotten meat. There's not no parasite. Well, not no parasites that can send you to the hospital, right? And this has also, I can speak as a scientist, this is also because it is not easy to create an EVALI type of crisis with nicotine, with the ingredients of nicotine, which are hydrosoluble. And let me tell you something. Like in 2019, when the valley was raging in the US, I get a phone call from a medical doctor from Durango. Durango is a state of Mexico in the north. And he says, I've seen some kids who who try to put THC on top of their nicotine tanks, and then when they push a button, they inhale some very nasty smoke, and now they're sick. But they were released in a few hours. It was a what happens is that if you put THC things or things that are not soluble in water, they will not create the mixture, the solution. They will be more like a mixture than a solution. And when you warm that up, these things will burn, and then it is something that you simply cannot vape, like you would not like to vape some nasty smoke from a chimney, right? And it is very visible, so it's not very easy. And yeah, we have had health issues, but minor, because people are eating very low quality. They are vaping. Many people are vaping low quality devices, right? But we never had an Evali never came to Mexico. It didn't come to Mexico. Nothing like Evali has happened so far. So far, because you never know, right?
Yeah, and it's disappointing to hear that, of course, folks are reading getting their information about this issue from the New York Times and Washington Post and all of the usual suspects here in America. But today, I don't know if you have seen this, but there's a press release going around. The American Cancer Society has completed their own study on the perception of e-cigarettes versus cigarette harms and how that changed during the EVALI epidemic. And they sort of come to the conclusion that I think, I didn't read this thing word for word, but Matt, you might be able to help me out here, that essentially the panic was overblown and ultimately led to people going back to smoking, which is not a great outcome. And of course, they couch all of this stuff in reiterating their concerns about e-cigarettes and so on. But is something like this likely to make an impression with AMLO and other folks in the administration in Mexico?
Not with them. Not with the. See, uh, Lopez Obrador, he's simply saying, "I'm not going to revoke my decrees. My decrees are secular and untouchable, and that's it." And he, whenever speaks about vaping, he reads a script from Tobacco Free Kids. That, so forget about him. And he's like that in every issue, in every issue, not only in vaping, in political issues, in policies, in public policies. For example, there were shelters in Mexico City for abused women, and he said, no, 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 there's corruption going on, and he closed them. And he was criticized. He said, "You need you this corruption had to be taken care by scalpels, cutting delicately, and you came with a machete and you cut it all, right?" But he's like that. He he is a president that takes very drastic actions and doesn't care about consequences. And if you criticize him, he becomes more intransigent. That's the way he is. So forget about him. Lopez Gatell Lopez Gatell is an executioner from Bloomberg Philanthropies. So you can also forget about him. The problem is that Lopez Gatell has a vertical control over all official medicine in Mexico. Like, if there is any forum or anything where I am going to be there, or where some other medical doctors who are not in the official sector, if they are in the official sector, can be fired. But if they are in the private sector and they are known to be tolerant about vaping, he orders people in his ministry to boycott that, not to go. He does not allow anybody to join any platform with any other person who is not who is mildly supportive of vaping, right? So official medics now, what you can say is we have here a sort of Gorbachev situation. There are many medical doctors inside of the official sector who do not agree, but they will not say a word because they can be fired. You have no idea how vertical is the control that this guy has over over the official medical sector, right? Now, what can be very useful is that the society as a whole in Mexico, and especially those liberal, educated Mexicans that look at the New York Times, that they get this information. Because, the American Cancer Society, what you described, it's very, very timid if you compare it with Public Health England or the British government. This is something that I say all the time. I say all the time, you look at the United States and you look at the New York Times and you look at University of San Francisco, California, San Francisco, and you look at Harvard, and they, but the United States is not the world. Look at the United Kingdom. And I say that all the time, all the time. But that has no effect when there are political constraints, the way that I described, the effect of Bloomberg philanthropies in this type of policy in public policies in Mexico. So, but it is very useful to spread information. If the winds are changing in the U.S., that will have an effect in Mexican society because remember, when the United States sneezes, Mexico gets pneumonia. Okay? So things that happen in the US are very influential in Mexico. One thing that might happen in the US that will be a blow to Lopez Gatel and Lopez Obrador would be if the FDA approves the PMTA of more vaping products and vaping products that are that are popular. Even Juul. If they approve Juul, that will be a blow up because we can say, Lopez Gatel is discredited, and the WHO, the FDA has more authority than the WHO. We can claim that, but so again, I say, events in the U.S. can be very influential in Mexico.
Yeah, well, hopefully they're catching on to the fact that FDA is authorizing some products. Obviously, we haven't seen anything in flavors yet, but we do have at least that first step of these products are appropriate for the protection of public health, and hopefully that gets through to people with any influence or power in Mexico. And sort of speaking of which, what's been your experience with Provapio? Are people getting are consumers in Mexico getting involved? Are they as angry about this as folks in the United States, or do you have some kind of barriers to getting people engaged?
Yeah, look, it's not very easy in Mexico because civil society in Mexico is much weaker than the U.S. or in Europe. Remember that Mexico was a dictatorship for 70 years. What López Obrador is trying to do is to go back to those times. He's trying to regenerate or recreate the type of dictatorship that we had between 1930 and 2000. It's a dictatorship where it's not a bloody dictatorship like the military juntas. It's a civil dictatorship in which the presidents take office every 6 years, and then they appoint somebody for the next 6 years, and so on. This is what happened between 1930 and 2000, and they do not nationalize things like in Cuba or things like. It's not communism. It's not Venezuela. It's not Cuba. It's not North Korea or the Soviet Union or whatever. But it's a very strong personal control by the president and civil society. All these autonomous forces that are counterbalances, they are dismissed. They are defunded or combated and so on. And López Obrador is trying to go back to that time. Now, in civil society is very difficult. And Pro Mexico, we don't even have a bank account. We are very few guys, and I can say that from 2018 that we launched that we created this association to present day, we have made a lot of noise. A lot of noise. We are very happy that given our meager resources, what we have been able to do, we have like about 15,000 followers, and whenever something happens with vaping, we are called for interviews, right? The main media outlets do not even call us then, or they just give us one paragraph and so on. But and it is difficult. Like many vendors are disunited. They're starting to make their act together, and some of them have quarrels between each other and so on. But we are respected. Generally speaking, the vendors look for us for information, right? Most of the vendors, not all of them. And consumers in Mexico do not, we don't have, you know, we cannot say we have 100,000 followers. Most people that use the devices in Mexico just use them and are not interested in doing anything else. Just use them. And so it's very difficult. We do not have an organized, powerful movement of compute or of consumers that will be challenging. But we have sufficient. We are, let's say, like a few thousands. But like for example, last week there was a demonstration that it was a symbolic closure of the equivalent of our FDA, the COFEPRIS, and about 500 people turned out. So in Mexico, if you can get a turnout of about 300, 500 people, that means that you are alive, because society is not very participative and civil society is still weak. So that's, but I'm actually very proud of Probateo for being a number of guys that you can count with your hand. We've made a hell of a lot of noise, but and we are limited. We have a ceiling, like there, as much as you can have tolerance. The fact that it is illegal means that there is a ceiling to how much you can grow, right? So what we have tried also to talk with legislators, like the two legislators that launch a law initiative to legalize and regulate vapes. We influence them. We had meetings with them. We had working meetings with them, and we influence them. And this is something that we keep trying to do all the time. Whenever there is a change in the houses of Congress, we go and talk to legislators. We try to make contact with them. And it's not always easy. It's not always possible, because many people don't want to deal with vaping. And even in academia, look, I went to the chemistry department in the National University to propose them to do an experiment, an emission experiment. The moment I mentioned vaping, they did it politely, but they sent me flying through the window. They were not interested, because if you say vaping, then the whole faculty of medicine will be against you, and they will accuse you of being a tobacco front. And so it's very difficult. Like, for example, according to Lopez Gatel and all the health ministry, Probapeo Mexico is a tobacco front. Why they say that? Because we belong to INCO, International Network of Nicotine Consumer Associate organizations. We belong to INCO, and INCO receives a grant from the foundation of a smoke-free foundation. But we don't receive that grant. And the money that INCO receives is for INCO, for purposes of INCO. We don't get that money. Roberto, Mexico doesn't have that money. We don't even have a bank account. We work with a shoestring budget. But nevertheless, we're accused. And I have been personally libeled and slandered in media, and also in forums in the lower house of common. Me and also Tomaso Gorman were accused, and there were personal attacks against us. You know the way Bloomberg Philanthropy acts. in countries like Mexico, Latin America, Africa, and Asia, they have no restraints. Bloomberg operatives in Mexico, they slander you very nastily, and they act. For example, Lopez Gatell during the legislative process, the operatives of Lopez Gatell excluded legislators. Okay, if they exclude me, I'm a nobody. I'm the director of a small association. But they also excluded federal legislators, telling, and not openly. They work in a very coward way. They in the corridors of the chambers, they tell people, don't talk to this legislator because he's a tobacco front. And Mexico signed the FTCT treaty, so you cannot talk to these people. And legislators many times are ignorant of these issues, and they're afraid to talk to you. It's very insidious the way the Bloomberg philanthropy and its operatives is acting in countries like Mexico, where institutions are much weaker and accountability is much weaker, and scrutiny is sometimes non-existent. It's important that you Americans know that the way anti-vaping forces act in our countries is something that they would never dare to do in the US. I think it's important that you understand that.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately we're all painfully aware of the tactics employed by the Bloomberg philanthropies, and of course, well, I don't know if it's necessarily all on the World Health Organization. Of course, being subject to the influence of healthier than thou type organizations. But for sure, we see the same thing here, especially among academics. We've had Brad Radu on the Twitter Spaces who risked his career to tell the truth about switching to smokeless tobacco. But I think we have a lot more sunshine here. Unfortunately, people choose to stay in the darkness. But you're describing what seems to be kind of a pattern here, which is that Bloomberg philanthropies and the World Health Organization seem to be preying on countries that have sort of dictatorships light or light democracy, and as you mentioned, sort of weak civil society, which is something that I don't know how people can justify that. And rather than relying on the science and evidence, they're simply going into countries where the constituency is easily pushed around. And so I guess I kind of wanted to make sure that we gave you enough time to talk about your insights on Bloomberg and what they're doing. And as we've got probably about 5 more minutes here, I just want to make sure that we're giving that topic enough air. And so, in your experience in Mexico, certainly, but things that you've been watching going on around the world, this behavior seems to be epidemic. Does that jive with your experience?
Yeah, and I wanted to say something also about popular perceptions, because I've talked about the health ministry and media and intellectuals and so on. But people, ordinary people, the taxi driver, the vendor in the street, a peasant, or a dentist, or common people, let's say poor, middle class, whatever, the general people. How do they perceive that? And here, let me tell you something. Like we know that vaping is very different from smoking, but there is a connection in the perception of smoking and the perception of vaping, because you and I and people who are listening, we know it's very different. But since the ritual is very similar, many people believe that vaping is some form of smoking. You tell them, yeah, but you are replacing the smoke with an aerosol, and it's not risky and so on. And then say, well, okay, then it's a sort of smoking that will cause you very little harm. But in Mexico, smoking was never denormalized like in the US. It like I used to have colleagues who hated smoking when I was a smoker, But if they would see me smoking in the parking lot or in the garden outdoors, they wouldn't mind. But in the U.S., smoking would be banned in the whole campus, right? And so there is a hatred of smoking in the U.S. that doesn't exist in Mexico. Also, the tobacco wars against the tobacco industry, that's an American thing. It happened in the US. It didn't happen in Mexico. If you tell Mexicans that the tobacco companies are some sort of Hitler figures, they're not going to believe you because we have had, in Mexico, about 80 people are murdered every day. And there are some corruption fits in Mexico that are horrible. Like in the last administration, it's not something only of Lopez Obrador. It's something historical. Like in the previous administration, one of the governors of a state of Mexico was caught trafficking with cancer medicine for children. So children would receive water, and the cancer medicine was sold in a black market. When you see this type of corruption and crimes and so on, you cannot believe that the tobacco company is a sort of Hitler figure, right? So there is no special hatred against big tobacco in Mexico. Big tobacco is just one of the corrupt entities in the world. It's not the most corrupt. And so, in this respect, vaping is not there is no popular hatred of vaping. Like, I talk to many taxi drivers, they let me vape in their cars. And I think that's an important thing to bear in mind. Like the hostility in Mexico, there are desperate efforts to recreate a hostility to nicotine, to vaping, and also to smoking. Because look, I don't think that it is humane to ban smoking in a park or to ban smoking in the beach. I think that's absolutely authoritarian. Even if I agree with you that smoking is a terrible thing to do, but you should allow adults to do it whenever they do not disturb third parties. And nobody is going to get sick by somebody smoking in the beach. Now, they are trying to recreate this type of hatred in the Mexican public. And I think that it's important for us to prevent that. Because Lopez Obrador was awarded a prize by the WHO. The official reason is because we have now a new tobacco law that it is mimicking California or it is mimicking Australia in the sense that it is forbidding to smoke in wide open areas that are not clearly delineated. And the fact that they are not delineated means that there's going to be a lot of police abuse in that. But again, I go back to the same thing. Popular attitudes to vaping in Mexico are neutral. They don't care if you are vaping in a garden or something like that, and you do not disturb them, even if you are smoking. People will not care, right? And I think it's important to bear this in mind. See, in Mexico, it's popular attitudes are not as bad as in the U.S. I've been in the U.S. and I get all and when I was a smoker, I was harassed many times. Many times I have to tell people the F word because they were so nasty. That doesn't exist in Mexico. It's only few people, and typically they are caterers or hacks of the health ministry who do that. But the population in Mexico is not hostile to vaping.
Yeah, I will say Americans do enjoy their inflated sense of self-righteousness. And for sure, it has gotten to ridiculous lengths here in banning smoking outdoors. And I know in my where I live in very, very upstate New York, the fines for smoking on county property go up to $500. Which is, of course, ripe for abuse. And fortunately, we were able to change the penalties here in the city of Plattsburgh, where I live, they were trying to propose a similar ordinance that would have even criminalized possession by adults in outdoor public spaces in the city with the same kind of fine. So we really do love love pushing the limits there. But all of that having been said, we have reached the top of the hour. It's 4 o'clock here, and I promised everybody that we'd be done within an hour. So Roberto, I know your time is precious, and thank you very much for joining us and helping us understand a bit about what's going on in Mexico. And of course, in line with people using these products and sharing their stories, there is an international collection of testimonials. Folks can find that at righttovape.org. It's a collaboration between CAFRA and CASA, so that we can collect all of these international stories, and hopefully we'll get some Mexican consumers to share their experiences. Not that any of this is necessarily going to end up in the New York Times, but it's out there in the world so that people can reference it, and hopefully officials and really just our neighbors start to pay attention to what we've been doing and how we've been succeeding in terms of stopping smoking and improving our health. So with that, I know I still got Danielle here, so I don't know if Danielle had any burning questions or things to bring up, but I'll give you just a second to chime in just in case.
I didn't have any burning questions, but I wanted to very much, I know we're not there yet, but thank Roberto for coming on. This has been incredibly fascinating, and I've learned personally so much about, vaping in Mexico and the tobacco culture and things like that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. And thanks, everybody, for listening, for awarding me this hour to talk to you. I'm very happy, and anytime you need any information, please don't hesitate to ask me.
Absolutely. Thanks. And as things develop in Mexico and other places around the world, we'll have you back, I'm sure. Always enjoy your very colorful and accurate insights as to what the international efforts are and how that's affecting people. And so that brings us to the close of the Twitter space. For those of you following CASA Media, you'll notice that we've been taking some breaks from our podcast. We don't have a podcast again until June 18th. And to be perfectly honest, I'm lobbying so that we can just take the whole summer off. But we will be back here with Twitter Spaces in a couple of weeks. We don't have a guest yet, so if you're not following us on Twitter at CASA Media, go ahead, give us a follow, hit the notification bell so you know when we set one of these things up. And of course, Kristen is always putting out really useful content. I'm sure you'll find the American Cancer Society study coming up at some point. For those who are just tuning in and don't know anything about CASA, you can check us out on the internets at CASA.org, CASAA.org. Sign up, it's free, and get involved. We have a couple of opportunities available for folks right now to share your stories and your opinions. There are 2 comments with the FDA, one on a rule that would ban the sales of menthol cigarettes, another that would ban flavored quote-unquote cigars, which is a big category. But go check it out. Go to our website, just search menthol, and it'll take you to the post. The other thing that's going on is we are collecting testimonials from people who use nicotine products, whether you smoke or have switched successfully to a smoke-free product. We want to hear from you. If you are also someone living with a mental health condition or substance use disorder, this is a very important population who smokes at disproportionately higher rates than the rest of the population. Folks like us are considered hard to reach, and we tend to resist anti-smoking messaging and smoking therapies because there's a lot of other stuff going on. And so it's really important for us to hear your stories. And this is part of a larger project that's developing. And so again, just go to our website, type in the search bar mental health, and you'll see a couple of posts and this one asking for people's testimonials. And we hope to hear from you. So with that, I think I've got all the things. Visit our shop while you're on the website. You can wear the positive messages of tobacco harm reduction. Danielle has made a good collection of excellent designs that you'll be happy to wear out in public and let the world know that you switched to vaping or other smoke-free alternatives. And with that, thanks again, Roberto. Thanks, Danielle, for being the host. Thanks, Matt, for joining us. And thank you, everyone, for listening and participating. And we'll see you next time.
Yep.